Hey, flower friends, welcome. You're listening to the Field and Garden Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Mason Ziegler, flower farmer, author, teacher, and entrepreneur coming to you from southeastern Virginia. This podcast is where I can connect with you each week talking farming, gardening, business, and even garden dogs. You're going to hear stories, firsthand experiences, including my blunders and just about everything in between when it comes to growing flowers. The Field and Garden Podcast is made possible by thegardenersworkshop.com, where our mission is to make it possible for flower lovers at all levels to grow and enjoy flowers for pleasure and for profit. If this is your first time friend listening, I'm glad you're here, and I hope that we can become friends. Today's episode is something that I am personally struggling with. And that, my friends, is resisting the urge to overplant. And I think we all face that. It's spring, right? And it's natural for us to be overzealous, to be so ready to have plants growing and seeds starting and planting and mulching and harvesting, dreams to come true, right? But here's the thing. If you're on the journey to become a professional flower farmer, this is the first test of how serious you are about starting a flower farming business. Not so much a test, but a willingness to follow not the rules, but to follow your plan, for Pete's sake, right? I think one of the perhaps most frequently heard story about people that become flower farmers is they're basically gardeners gone wild. I call it the gardeners gone wild syndrome. You know, we are just so crazy for gardening, for overexcitement and that desire to grow as much as possible. That's what kind of gets us on this journey. But we have to channel and control that urge to make it work, to help us reach that goal, right? Because it can negatively impact the rest of your growing season. So I just thought that this list that I've created is not only a reminder list to you, it is a reminder list to me as we are preparing in the next week to start our first major spring planting of warm season tender annuals. And y'all, we have so many beautiful transplants, and I know we have more than what we need for our plan. That's my insurance policy, right? That's the insurance that we have enough healthy, vibrant transplants to plant for the plan and to fill the beds up completely, to not run out, to not have puny plants. But let's look at the challenges that doing that actually creates for us, right? So the fallout is that overplanting often reduces the quality of what we're doing overall. You know, it doesn't seem like it today. It's like, oh, well, we were only supposed to plant 10 feet of bed in XYZ. Let's just go ahead and do 15 or 20. When you're faced with that beautiful tray of transplants and you've only planted half or maybe 2/3 of it, and you filled up your planned space, it is so easy to fall off the wagon and planting it. Overcrowding in your garden space, and not so much overcrowding as overplanting, can just make it challenging in the future to care for and to maintain those plants, which overall is going to lead to really big problems. And one of those problems for me is basically just chaos. You know, planting too many plants of a variety, or even worse yet, I mean, let's just backstep for a minute. Let's just say you're still in the seed starting portion of your plan How easy is it every time you go in and say, oh, yeah, I need to order more sunflower seeds. I can see that I'm going to run out for my succession in the next 6 weeks. I better get them. You go in to order them, and guess what? You see other varieties and species that you thought, oh, what's that? I didn't plant that, or I've never seen that before. Let's get some of that too. And friends, the chaos that comes from adding in unplanned more varieties can make it difficult to just take care of everyday business like watering, fertilizing, pest control. How do you take care of it? When do you harvest it? Everything about it. It's a new species. You don't even know anything about it. And now I'm not saying that you shouldn't try new things, but now is not the time in a heated moment of desire to do it, right? So chaos can really be created by bringing in new stuff unplanned and overplanting. So if you think the chaos is an issue now, just wait till they start blooming and you have all those flowers to try to sell. You know, the overplanting can lead to a glut of stems to sell and just making it challenging, you know, especially if you're still in that aspiring to become a flower farmer, meaning you don't have lines of customers waiting for flowers. Once you reach that point in your business after a season or two, then you can kind of indulge in this misbehavior of overplanting because you have places for them to go. Friends, I just cannot tell you how derailing it is to do all that extra work that you create that doesn't really turn out to be successful. And then they start blooming and you have tons of flowers and you're standing surrounded in buckets of flowers and you still don't have them all cut and you have nowhere for them to go. There's just nothing worse than that. To watch them age out, throw them in the compost heap. And even worse than that for me is having flowers out in the garden that aren't cut, because you know what that does? That's the beginning of the end of that crop, because if you're not cutting it, new flowers aren't going to be coming. So what does this lead to? Burnout at like on the interstate at like high speed, right? You know, trying to manage all of these overly ambitious plantings that we've done is physically and mentally draining, particularly if you are a one-person show, which is what I did. I think it was 6 or 7 years, maybe it's 4 or 5 years before I hired my first person. When you're trying to do it all, you want to talk about killing yourself. Not only that, it totally burns your family out because, you know, that's, you know, for me, what was happening is I was working from sun up to sundown, still not doing a good job, you know, eating cereal for dinner every night. And, you know, my man was willing to do that. He was willing to do whatever it took to help me. But you have to progress from that, y'all. And you cannot progress from getting your P's in a row and getting your days structured and make it a normal working day while you're following this overindulgent behavior, right? So the burnout is accelerated. Burnout is always a challenge for farmers. I mean, it's honestly I'm a part of a big entrepreneurial family. Burnout is potential in every small business. It's not just farmers. Farmers tend to think their job is harder than every other entrepreneur on the planet. And I believe that probably for the first 10 or 15 years, because I was just under that illusion. Friends, it's not. When you start expanding your reach and your view and learning more about business, you see that every business has these unique opportunities to overindulge and burn out. And for us, one of the triggers is this overplanting business, which in my opinion is one of the fastest tracks to burn out and crashing and burning and losing flower farmers, right? And by July or August, you're done. You're going to be done. And guess what? Spring and fall are the biggest, best seasons for flower farming, for me anyway, for in demand. You never even get to see that second high demand season because you crash and burn in July and August because of what you're getting ready to do right now. So some of the other things to think about, overlooking some of the most important steps you're supposed to be following in your flower farming journey. And that is when you overplant, that tends to make you overlook the most important step, I believe, that happens in flower farming to lead to more success is soil building. When you have so many plantings that are overwhelming you in all ways, from tending to them, watering them, fertilizing them, then cutting them, and then attempting to sell them all, you tend to not take care of your soil. And that, to me, is like the front seat issue for new flower farmers and ongoing for even seasoned flower farmers. But in the beginning, it is so very important. And when you're overindulging and overplanting, it's just really easy for that to leave the scene of your mind. And all this excessive planting goes on to even deplete your soil's nutrition, and just and weed control. Holy cow, y'all. Losing control of weeds is also a really big part of this. So resist the urge. And then when you do have problems that come up from all of this overplanting, disease and pests are just rampant. When you aren't paying attention, when you're overplanting, perhaps ignoring some of the basic needs of plants, that just invites disease and pests. Because, we know now that stressed plants, for whatever reason, have just send the red flag up the flagpole that says, pests, come and get me. I'm weak and puny. And that's just, you don't even see it that way, though, when this is happening to you, right? I can remember so very, very well. I think back to things that I thought were just going to take me out, and I created them. And so you can't address problems when we overplant because we're so overwhelmed in that whole vicious cycle. And speaking of cycles, I can remember so vividly. So the work building that y'all see me do a lot of shows from and see us shooting video ins, or when you come and visit the farm on that once a year annual open farm, that building was built in 2002. That was 4 years after I started my flower farm. And I can remember it was right after it was built because I didn't have a cooler, didn't have air conditioning. It was just the building, right? And I can remember I did a open house for local customers and friends. And I can remember explaining to them about why local was so much better than shipped in flowers, because you get them to the customer so much sooner, and how, when flowers sit, they get old, and it's a vicious cycle because next week, guess what? You have a whole new crop of flowers. So you want to move all your flowers as quick as possible. And one of my really great flower friends, family friend, church friend, Susan Ackerman, who was actually my personal editor and helped me to get started writing and overcoming my dyslexia. She grew up on a dairy farm. And after I finished explaining that whole old flower problem, she said, it's just like the old milk cycle. She said, growing up, your mom is trying to clear out all the old milk that's in the refrigerator before it goes bad. All the while, the new fresh milk starts getting old while you're drinking the older milk. And how much smarter it would have been to have just ditched the old milk and to start drinking the fresh milk to get ahead of the cycle. And that's exactly what happens when you overplant and overindulge. You get into this cycle that you can't even see how getting ahead can resolve the problem and give you a better product. So trying to harvest and process an amazingly overwhelming amount of flowers just fuels the vicious cycle and just leads to lost income. And, another one I think of is overplanting limits your ability to life. I am coming to the conclusion now after almost 30 years in business, actually, that people talk about life balance, and I do believe that is so incredibly important. However, I don't think it's the way that people think. It hasn't been for me anyway. I love my business. I love the root of my business, which is gardening and planting and farming and harvesting and enjoying and eating vegetables and all that mess. But when you love your life's work, your business, it does take up more time, but you learn to control it. And that makes you love your business even more. And if you can't control this very first step of resisting messing up your plan, you're really never going to get to the rest of it. And I just want to say that it's not easy by a long darn shot, but there is payoff to really holding yourself accountable to not overplant. And, let's even just consider this part, the waste. The overspending that happens on people overbuying seeds, transplants, bulbs, roots, whatever it is, tubers, for this over ambitious overplanting. I mean, that's one of the leading causes of crashing and burning. People run out of money. They think you can't make any money, and you can't when you're overspending on things you shouldn't even be buying. Y'all, all the pieces, now that I'm sitting on the other side looking back, I mean, it's just so easy to see why so many people fail. When you think about that gardener gone wild syndrome that got us here, you just have to address that first, because the report card of your business is the profit and your paycheck, the owner's paycheck. And a lot of people just don't ever get there, right? And it's about overplanting is the root of it. And, just all these things are running through my mind. How much easier is it for you to injure yourself, overworking yourself, no rest, back pains, just a lot of opportunity for physical injury because of the demanding and increasing the risk. You read about now big companies. I can remember, I think it was Toyota that came out decades ago showing that they give their workers like a 15-minute cat nap in the morning, and they do stretching. There are reasons, y'all. That stuff is all backed up by facts of injury and burnout, right? And it's so easy to overlook that when you are the boss, with the one in control, right? And me, I cannot even mention all of this without mentioning totally screws up your succession plan. The succession plan of having a steady, continuous harvest of crops to sell, a steady, continuous lower level of seed starting and working in the garden, because it's more of a normal work week instead of a marathon to get it all done, which is what a lot of people are facing right now. It totally will end your succession plan if you plant every square inch of garden you have or use up more. Bobo and I took a pledge this year that we were not going to to plant anything in the first block of warm season tender annual plantings, except for warm season tender annual plantings from that first plan. Sometimes what'll happen to us is that second cool flower planting for me, that very early spring planting, a lot of times we don't have room for them in the cool flower garden. And I'd start chipping away at the first spring planting of warm season tender annuals. We just said, we're not doing it this year. And so far, we're holding true to that. So it looks like that's actually going to happen. So another good reason to resist, it screws up your succession plan. And friends, that chaos and overwhelm, it just undermines everything. You just don't have time to think. I don't care how great your big calendar is that, I lead people to use. That's the brain of my flower farm, was that big calendar that we use every year and fill out. And even with that, you can't address the issues of the day. And trust me, there will be 10 issues every day that are not on your plan. When you are so overwhelmed, you just can't generally take care of them in a good way. And, all of this is what takes out so many potential professional flower farmers, y'all. And I think because flower farming is so easy to step into as a business straight from a home gardener without much infrastructure or other than just having a little bit of ambition, it's easier than like opening a retail store or starting some kind of agency, because with those, you typically need a lot more stuff and investment. Flower farmers, a lot of gardeners just kind of edge their way in, and they come in so unprepared, and that just leads to such overwhelm. And what I'm just saying is, if more gardeners would take a more logical, okay, I am going to start a business. I know there's probably more to starting a business than just growing a bigger garden, which there is, friends. Maybe I should take that road, not just plant, 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 plant. I often say that in a conversation I had with Jenny Love of Love and Fresh Flowers, she and I came to the agreement that the flowers are like 25% of a flower farming business. The rest of it is the rest of the business. That's how important it is. So don't overplant, friends, because you have a lot of other mess to address. And failing to properly plan and manage can just result in such a waste of time, such a waste of money, and such a waste of resources. And I'm just giving you the big shout out and the shout out to myself as we prepare. I bet you I have 30 to 40% more transplants than we're supposed to have. And that's my method. But when the day comes where the rubber meets the pavement is when you actually plant them. Can you pick the best and only plant those for their allotted amount of space? Throw away excessive plants, friends, by composting them. They'll come back to help you. Giving them away, you can do that if you have friends. But most people just don't ever plant them. That's what I'm learning. Just bite the bullet and compost them instead of letting them sit and carrying them around on your shoulders is what that does. Just don't plant every stinking plant you start or buy. Saying this to myself, y'all, as much as I'm saying it to you, don't just stop overspending, stop overplanting. And if we can control those two things, you will be an incredibly stellar professional flower farmer. And friends, if you're enjoying my podcast and finding it helpful, I have a huge favor to ask for you to drop a review and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to this to. Like and share it with your friends, because that helps us so very, very much. That's what makes the platforms show our podcast to more people. And I just appreciate it so much. And remember that home base to everything that we do is over at thegardenersworkshop.com. You can sign up for our farm news, which is where you will stay in the loop on everything that's going on. Like our open farm date was just announced, June 28th of 2025. Get all the details at the Gardener's Workshop under the About Us, and just stay in the loop with lots of great content. So friends, thanks for joining me here today. And until we meet again, remember, don't overplant. That's what I'm trying to say to myself over and over. Don't do it, Lisa. Don't do it, Bobo. Don't overplant. All right, friends. Ciao till we meet again.